Our topic today is called methylene blue. Is it hype or helpful? And I've kind of come about this in a roundabout way. So why methylene blue? I've had a couple experiences over the last 3 to 4 months that caused me to want to prepare and learn a little bit more about methylene blue. The first one was in midsummer. One of my colleagues here in town, Dr. Willies, he's a good friend. He's a board certified family physician. He did his training at Mayo. He's really talented. And he asked me, hey, how often are you using methylene blue in your neurological patients? And I said, I'm not. And he says, oh, I was curious to see what your response has been. I think some of my patients have really liked it. And I thought, okay, I've got to learn a little bit more. And then my good friend Eric, right, who's going viral on his TikTok account. Eric, in one of our presentations that I gave about nitric oxide, Eric asked me, Randy, how does this fit with methylene blue? And I said, I don't know. I've read a little bit about that methylene blue is an antagonist to nitric oxide. So I didn't really give it a favorable initial response. And he says, maybe that's something we can learn about in the future. So he gave me a little bit of a push. And then I was up in Seattle doing my board certification in hyperbaric. This was in October. And my good friend Jason Saunders, who runs USA Hyperbaric and was the moderator for my board certification, one day I saw him taking a supplement and I didn't recognize it. And I asked him, what are you taking? He says, oh, it's methylene blue. I'm just a little bit more clear when I do my presentations with some methylene blue. And I was like, okay, that's it. I've got to prepare a presentation and learn a little bit more about methylene blue. So that was kind of the prompting to get me to the point where I'm at now. For those of you who have heard of methylene blue, you might know it as a dye, right? There's the name, it's methylthionolinium chloride. I don't even know if I can say it, but it's used as a chemical dye in the textile industry. But you'll see it's also used as a medication for the treatment of methemoglobinemia. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but not a ton, right? You can see it can also be used to treat urinary tract infections or in people who have low oxygen. So that's something that is pretty intriguing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It actually has FDA approval when you're using a USP, that stands for United States Pharmacopoeia, when you're using a purified pharmacy form of methylene blue, because you could go on Amazon today and buy fish tank blue, and it's not purified, and it probably has contaminants. It might have heavy metals, right? It comes from the manufacturing industry. That's not the type of methylene blue that I'm talking about. This is a pure form of methylene blue. It's a USP grade. And you'll see that this middle paragraph right here says Prove Blue is an oxidation reduction agent indicated for the treatment of pediatric or adult acquired methemoglobinemia. That tells you it's safe in kids, right? It's safe in women and certainly safe in all adults under the right circumstances. So that's part of what I'm going to talk about today, and talk about, well, why would you take it? Because I doubt anyone on this telephone call has methemoglobinemia. So that will be our discussion. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about methemoglobinemia, but I just want you to know that it is when the hemoglobin in your red blood cells becomes oxidized, and it carries oxygen, but it can't release oxygen into the tissues. So you're carrying it around, but you're stingy, and that red blood cell can't release it. There's two forms. One's an inherited, so it's a genetic form, and the other form is acquired, meaning that you've had some sort of exposure to a drug or a chemical or a toxin that it's made it so your hemoglobin does not release oxygen into the tissue. So this becomes an oxygen deprivation condition, if you will. And there's a lot I could talk about with methemoglobinemia. I'm not going to spend time today just because I already have a lot of material to cover, and I don't feel like this is going to help us reach our goals. So at the National Institutes of Health, there was a lot of discussion about methylene blue as a treatment for COVID. Now, if you think back to the pandemic, it wasn't like the medical community was very open-minded about integrative or alternative interventions for the treatment of COVID. Now, I was aware of this. I had heard about it, but trust me, that everyone that practiced medicine at that time had a little bit of anxiety about doing anything that fell outside of the standard of care and guidelines. Even though we use things off-label, or if you use your brain a little bit and you think about the mechanisms of action, you can often take one medicine for the treatment of X condition and apply it to something else. Again, I wasn't really willing to do that during COVID because I didn't want to get canceled. But certainly methylene blue could be used off-label, meaning that it's FDA approved for the treatment of methemoglobinemia, but you could use it off-label to treat SARS-CoV-2 or many of the other things that I'm going to talk about today, specifically neurological issues. And if you look at this, looks like I've got a Zoom thing on there. Now, if you look at this, methylene blue given in an IV versus methylene blue given by mouth have even different benefits, right? So it could be very effective during COVID if you're given it in an IV, and there's IV bars that administer methylene blue. If you look at hydroxychloroquine, which is kind of a downstream derivative of a quinine, right, then you'll see that methylene blue actually outperformed hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of COVID. So how did I begin my search? I actually was very familiar with methylene blue during the time I was getting my board certification of hyperbarics, because a lot of the physicians, like this physician here, his name is Dr. Scott Schur, I've read a lot of his material about hyperbaric medicine, and he's a big proponent of methylene blue. I also ordered this book off Amazon called The Ultimate Guide to Methylene Blue. It's a good book. I wouldn't say it's great. Other than that, I won't give it a big review. And I'm also very familiar with the literature published by Francisco Gonzalez-Lima. He's a PhD researcher at the Neuroscience Institute at the University of Texas. And he has printed a lot of research in red and near-infrared light therapy. So I'm very familiar with his research in light therapy. And it's pretty interesting how much he actually talks about methylene blue as well. He's got lots of podcasts. He's been interviewed many times all over the internet, in YouTube, about methylene blue, several different parts. And he's combining methylene blue and also red and near-infrared light therapy to try to improve individuals' health. So I'll circle back to that here towards the middle of my presentation. This is one of his articles. It was printed in Frontiers in Cellular Neuroscience. It's a very well-respected article and journal, but I want you to know it's an opinion article. He didn't run a clinical trial. He's offering his opinion about trying to protect individuals against neurodegeneration, specifically using low-dose methylene blue and near-infrared light therapy. So it folds very well into what we do at A Mind for All Seasons, because y'all know how big of a fan I am of red light therapy, right? We have the helmet and the red light bed and a couple of individual panels, so I'm just a huge fan. So what does it do? These next few slides are where I get a tad technical, okay? And so if you tend to fog up when I start talking about the biological science, just bear with me, take a drink, and hang on, and I'll push through this relatively quickly. This is the first paragraph of the article that Francisco Gonzalez-Lima printed. So the first paragraph is that low-level methylene blue and near-infrared light are metabolically protective to a neuron. The next thing is they enhance the electron transport chain in mitochondria. And that sounds technical, but mitochondria and the electron transport chain are what give you ATP or energy. So that's a very big deal. Methylene blue preferentially enters the mitochondria in a neuron, and then with low-dose infrared light becomes a donator for those electrons. Why do you care if it's a donator? Because it helps make energy. And in the end, it will increase cellular respiration and increase cerebral blood flow. So anyone who's got bad blood flow, let's say the most common would be a TIA, or an individual who's had a stroke, that we might use a little bit of methylene blue in the treatment of that because we're trying to drive oxygen to the tissues of the brain. Okay, now you all have seen, I'm starting to talk about this more. Dr. Bredesen gave a mathematic equation. I call it his math equation. He's using as an example that he said the brain goes south, brain health goes south when we have inflammation that goes up and low energy production below that, right? Because it requires energy to clear and calm inflammation. So Dr. Bredesen says that inflammation is really defined as your immune system getting activated. So think of COVID long hauler syndrome. Think of a cold sore on your lip. Think of when you get the flu or irritable bowel or autoimmune disease. Anything that activates your immune system is going to be a problem for your brain. The second thing is energy production comes by the form of ATP, and that's always dependent on blood flow and oxygen delivery. Well, based on the research that I just showed you by Francisco Gonzalez-Lima, that's what methylene blue does. That's where methylene blue pulls into this equation and really enhances the production of ATP by strengthening blood flow and changing the way that oxygen bounces through the electron transport chain. So if you're really nerdy like I am, you want to really understand the science. So this is a cartoon schematic that's from the same article showing the electron transport chain, actually showing the membrane in a mitochondria. It'll show that methylene blue, when it comes into the system, is oxidized. But it starts binding to some of those hydrogen ions that you see right here. And when it binds to the hydrogen ions, it becomes reduced. That's where you hear this term. It's an oxidation reduction catalyst in the electron transport chain. That's what methylene blue does. So as it becomes reduced, it becomes colorless, right? And then if we add the near-infrared light, you'll see that this process is happening all through the electron transport chain of mitochondria. You put near-infrared light and then you stimulate protein 4 of the Krebs cycle, which is cytochrome C oxidase with near-infrared light, and then boom, ATP synthase is going to start spitting out ATP, and that's how we produce energy. I told you it was going to be a little technical, but the key is mitochondria dysfunction is almost at pandemic levels as well. There's an estimation that only 6% of Americans are very metabolically healthy. Metabolically healthy is almost always considered to be, well, you can't metabolize carbohydrates, so you need ketones. But if you think broader, metabolically healthy means that your mitochondria continue to produce a high level of ATP and you have plenty of energy to get you through your day. Well, most of America has mitochondrial dysfunction at many, many levels. And that's why there's so much fatigue. That's why there's so much pain and achiness. That's why there's so much depression and anxiety and mental health challenges. So we really do need something to strengthen mitochondria. So symptom management, when people say, well, what does it do? This is your money slide. These are the things that it does. So the first one is it has general mitochondrial optimization. Again, it sounds technical, but that benefit becomes optimized when you use red light, right? Red and near-infrared light. So it can be so beneficial. The next thing is it's very antioxidant in nature. So it's going to mimic the actions of glutathione or a CoQ10 or a PQQ or a resveratrol, right? All of those really strong antioxidants. That's what methylene blue would do. It was actually used as an anti-infective agent during World War II. It was the primary treatment for malaria. It improves ischemia via ATP. Ischemia means low blood flow, or when you get ischemia, you have a problem with the wrong kind of nitric oxide and you don't get good vasodilation. So with methylene blue, you'll change your interaction with some of the troublesome nitric oxide molecules like iNOS, inducible nitric oxide, and you'll dilate a blood vessel so you get better blood flow. It can also be used as a biofilm disruptor, and biofilms become very important during Lyme or mold treatment or other chronic infections like sinusitis, where your nasal passages are always totally inflamed. There's probably biofilm up there. These bacteria get together and clump together, and antibiotics really aren't very effective. Methylene blue is very, very safe. It's safe if you're using a USP, not an industrial dye, right? And some people that want to use really ultra high dosing, then we should check a lab called a G6PD lab, which would make sure that we're not going to hemolyze or break down their red blood cells, okay? So dosing is variable. In the literature, we use higher dosing for acute inflammation or ischemia or infections, or someone who needs immediate mitochondrial support. So in the emergency department, they give it IV for someone who has methemoglobinemia, okay? The dosing ranges somewhere between 0.5 milligrams and 5 milligrams per kilogram. And so I did the math, like I'm a 200-pounder. If you take my 200 pounds and you divide it by 2.2, so you get kilograms, I weigh 90 kilograms. And then if you multiply 90 times 0.5 milligrams, you get 45. If you take 90 and you multiply it times 5 milligrams, which would be considered higher dosing, you get 450. So look at this range of dosing. It's a huge range. And I wanted to share that with you so that you knew when I start talking about forms of methylene blue that I'm going to start using in my roadmaps and in my treatment summaries, now you have a frame of reference between dosing, between low and high dosing, okay? So methylene blue in the literature, I told you is between 0.5 and 5, and conservative practitioners will definitely keep it on the low side. I've purchased some methylene blue that comes in 200 milligrams per troche, and I've used it. I've experimented with it. I've test-driven this, right? So there is an application to be used, but the recommendation is that should only be done with practitioner guidance and only for shorter periods of time. So in an effort to be true to the science, I'm sharing all this science, but I'll always whittle it back to what are we going to do at a Mind for All Seasons? What would we encourage our patients to do, and how do we get this? So once again, this is the electron transport chain, and you'll see right here, protein complex 1 and 2, and this one right here in the middle that's got a Q, I'm going to highlight it, is actually CoQ10. So in the electron transport chain, this is where CoQ10 fits in. And this is why some people feel amazing when they use CoQ10, because it's helping to produce energy. It's also one of the reasons that individuals who feel really crappy with a statin, it's because CoQ10 is blocked in the use of a statin in the electron transport chain, okay? So methylene blue actually bypasses complex 1 and 2 and becomes the electron donor, so it actually bypasses the need for CoQ10. That's kind of a fascinating thing, right? Doesn't mean I don't think CoQ10 is important, man. I'll share a clinical case by the end about one of our sweet patients that just had an amazing response recently with CoQ10. So both of these are forms of methylene blue that I've purchased online and experimented with. So you'll see this one right here. It's called Lumitol Blue. And look at the dosing up here. This one bar is 175 milligrams. So if I go back to our dosing schedule, you'll see right here, the dosing range between low and high dose is 45 to 450. And if I go back to this picture of methylene blue from a company called Bredesen, this bar is 175. So it's kind of smack dab in the middle, even though I would consider it probably higher dosing. And it comes in these are called troches. Some people say troche, where it looks like a little waffle. And you'll see the waffle has 4 divisions. So when you purchase this, each one of these blue squares or these troches comes in here, and you can pop it out, and then you can break it into fourths. So even though this is 175, when you break it into a fourth, it has something like 35 milligrams of pure USP-grade methylene blue. Another company that I purchased troches from would be a company called Troscriptions. This is what's called Tro Plus. and its dosing is 16 milligrams. So this entire troche right here, this little waffle, only has 16. If you divide it up, it only has 4 if you take 1/4 of that. So compare the difference, right? A 16 milligram, 175 milligram, if you divide it up, you can do the math. So again, both of these have pharmaceutical grade compounded methylene blue that can be purchased on their websites. Okay. Interestingly enough, I found this fascinating. This product from Troscriptions is called troblucanatine, and it has 3 additional ingredients. It has caffeine, it has nicotine, and it has CBD. And you might think, oh my gosh, why would you get it with nicotine? Well, in the neurological literature, nicotine is actually considered nootropic. It's very, very healthy for the brain. It can really stimulate good brain function. The problem is that nicotine usually comes through smoking or vaping or chewing tobacco, and you get all of the other junk with that. So I have absolutely avoided nicotine in almost all circumstances. I might venture out and try a canatine just so that you have a frame of reference on the dosing amount. In this canatine product, there's 1 milligram of nicotine in an entire troche. So it's got 16 milligrams of blue, methylene blue, and 1 milligram of nicotine. So if you were to split this into fourths, you'd get 1/4 of a milligram. Why does that matter? Well, if you smoke a cigarette, you're going to get somewhere between 8 and 30 milligrams of nicotine. And so one little half a troche would be 0.5, or a full troche is 1 milligram. I think it's probably very, very safe. This is sold over the counter, right? Anyone can try it. So food for thought. As I've introduced it to some patients, some people are like, no way, I'm not doing it. And other people say, oh, hell yeah, that sounds amazing, right? Because it has 50 milligrams of caffeine too. Their Tro Plus is actually a 50 milligrams. So this has the same methylene blue, but this is only 16 milligrams USP. This is 50 milligrams. So if you were to split this troche, it'd have 12.5 in each one of the quarters. Okay. All right. So I want to just remind you what a nootropic is. In our roadmaps, I talk about nootropics a lot. I have an entire section at the end dedicated to nootropics. So in cosmetic neurology, just kind of meaning fun neurology that's out there, that's kind of what I do, right? I'm not doing neurosurgery, and I'm not a neurologist. I'm a family practice guy who just loves trying to help people have better brain function. Well, cosmetic neurology defines nootropics as a smart drug or a supplement that improves cognitive function, particularly executive functioning, right? So your ability to plan and to think and to do calculations, and it's kind of your CEO. It can also improve memory and creativity and motivation, and it can just really help individuals. The #1 nootropic in the world is caffeine. Caffeine is considered nootropic. And everyone on this call knows that when you use a little caffeine, it kind of perks up your brain and stimulates you a little bit, right? That's what nootropics do. We also use nootropics like vinpocetine, or we use alpha GPC, which is a form of, oh golly, it's early in the morning, I'm having a little bit of a brain fart. It's a form of choline, right? We also use mushrooms. You've heard a ton of talk about mushrooms like cordyceps or shiitake mushrooms, that they have nootropic benefits. We could talk a lot about nootropics, but I think that methylene blue is going to fall into my category of nootropics because they help to enhance learning, enhance memory and behaviors. It can protect the brain from chemical traumas. That's what methylene blue does, right? It protects the hemoglobin against oxidative stress. And it can also help subcortical control, all the mechanisms in the brain. It's just very few side effects and a high upside for an opportunity to make things better. So I want to give you some clinical examples that happened this week. Now, Eric will chuckle at this because recently I wrote a roadmap for a young man that came into the clinic, And I said, hey, this is a person I would use methylene blue in. And Eric kind of gave me an elbow and he's like, hey, it'd be really nice if you talk to us about your recommendations before you just make them so that we can talk intelligently to our clients about them. And he's right. I need to be better at that, but it's very typical practice medicine. This is, oh my gosh, I see you need, let's roll. So here's an example of this individual. This is a young man that's only 21 years old. Now, if you're on this call, you recognize we're not a typical family practice office. We don't take insurance. It's a cash pay model. And you have to be pretty committed to the treatment. So what would drive a 21-year-old to our clinic? And it's mood disorders and mental illness. This is where we pick up a lot of our kids. They either come because they have bad head injuries or they have bad mental health. And so this is really new. You'll see this came to us in December. So this is just a couple weeks ago. Just like all of you, when they get a roadmap, I did a large panel of blood work. And when I got his blood work back, I want to show you this. This is this young man's CBC, okay? So again, this blood was collected on 12/18, and then it was drawn 12/18 and then reported on 12/28. So this was his complete blood count. We call it a CBC. If you look up here, here's his white blood cell count. This is where you would say, does he have an infection? A white count of A is, no, he doesn't really have an infection, but that's starting to trend elevated, right? It gets above 10, we think, okay, there's an infection there. And then you look at his white blood cells, right? Everything looks normal until I come down here to his lymph. And his lymph tissue, the lymphocytes in his blood is very, very high. Now, when I see that, but the white blood cell count is normal, I always think viral. This dude has a viral infection. And then I start thinking, is it chronic or is it acute? Meaning, did this kid have a cold when he went to go get his blood drawn? So I'm really just looking at his cold. Is this the response to him getting a cold or a little bit of sinus congestion? And so I'm going to answer that question as we go. I actually think this is chronic, and there's a reason why. You'll see as we go through this. So lymphocyte counts are high. His omegas are very low, right? So I think, remember, omegas are the primary constituent of a cell membrane. So we've talked about how methylene blue has its effect in membranes of mitochondria. And this young man has very low levels of omega. So I think, okay, maybe there's a problem with the production of energy. Maybe that's a chronic infection because he cannot clear that virus. Okay, let's do another one. I looked at his gene typing. He's got one copy of ApoE4. I don't think for 1 minute that he has Alzheimer's disease or trending that way. But ApoE4 gene predisposes to an individual to have an inflammatory response that they're going to have a hard time controlling. Remember, go back to Dr. Bredesen, inflammation over energy production. These are the things that ring in my mind when I write roadmaps. And then I looked at his glutathione level. My gosh, you get a 22-year-old kid with a glutathione level of 183, that is in the toilet low for his age. This kid's glutathione level should be 300, right? And you'll see that the reference of the lab is they don't report it being low until it's 176. And on the high side, 323. So they've given you a range. But then look at the statement. They said the results are for investigational purposes. They don't have bazillions of people doing glutathione. At our company, we've tested probably 1,000 levels. I look at these day in and day out. So I feel like I have some credibility when I'm interpreting glutathione from the perspective of what individuals are struggling with. This glutathione level, even according to LabCorp, is almost flagging low. He's 21. That tells me this dude's got massive oxidative stress. So his lymphocyte counts are high, but his white count is not. So it tells me, oh, there's probably a viral charge to him. He's ApoE, or he has very low omega-3s. He's got the genetics that predict inflammation, and his glutathione has been completely used up. That tells me this dude has oxidative stress like crazy. Massive oxidative stress in a 22-year-old. So this kid's going to do really well with things like glutathione. He's going to do really well with CoQ10 or PQQ or resveratrol, the supplement called the One. And I would propose he probably would do really well with methylene blue. Okay, let's do another one. Oh, so in his roadmap, this is what I put. So when he reads his roadmap, I think this is page 5. His ApoE4 is there and his glutathione level 183. I said, hey, this is really low, suggested that you've got bad oxidative stress. And when I looked at his labs, I say, hey, your lymphocyte count is really elevated. So at this point in time, I said, you might consider a telemedicine call to discuss valcyclovir or methylene blue or other nutraceuticals that I've used, such as like X-Viramin. So this is what came out in his roadmap, and where Eric gave me a rib and said, hey, we should probably talk through this because I haven't seen this recommendation in previous studies. Let's do another one. Here's a clinical example of a 50-year-old lady who had a thyroidectomy. They removed her thyroid because there was a cancer scare. Turns out she didn't have cancer. In fact, they only removed part of her thyroid, and she's got her whole part, she's got half of it still there, even though she was told it was removed. She clearly has some autoimmunity, lots of chronic pain and joint pain and achiness, and all of this combined led to an early hysterectomy from fibroids. Well, when I did a telemedicine consultation with her just this week, this was my note, and I want to share some of these things. So this particular individual lost 25 pounds following the autoimmune paleo diet very closely. And she said, I can't tell you how much better I feel. And she went on to tell me what food she dropped out, what she's tried to reintroduce, how she feels. She's very intuitive. She's very thoughtful, and she's learning how food affects her. Then she makes this statement. Randy, I cannot believe how amazing I felt when I took the One. Now, the One is a supplement that I've been recommending for 5 years. It's a Quicksilver Scientific product, and it's a really high dose of an antioxidant. So it has PQQ, resveratrol, and CoQ10 wrapped in a liposome, meaning that it's very, very well absorbed. And she makes this comment, oh, I feel so much better when I took the One. And she says, I actually ran out and I didn't have refills, and I started to feel crummy. I started to ache, my energy dropped, I had a hard time getting out of bed. I didn't really know why that was happening. And then it dawned on me because I got the One back, and then when I started taking it, I felt amazing. I could just pop out of my bed and do my activities every day. She says it really made a difference. That's a supplement I'm going to take for the rest of my life. Well, when I heard her say that, and I went back and looked at her labs, it reminded me that she's got a lot of oxidative stress. So very similar to that other young man. She's had a lot of joint pain and synovitis, and she said it completely resolved with low dose naltrexone, almost completely gone. And so part of our consultation was to get prescription refills for low dose naltrexone. Again, that's another example. That's my clinical impression, that she's got a fair amount of oxidative stress. And so I introduced methylene blue and sent her to the website called Troscriptions to get a product called True Blue. And let's see how she does with it over the next little while. Okay. So summary, I want to just bring this back to summary, and then we can hopefully do some Q&A and have some additional discussion. When would you consider methylene blue, and why would it have some potential benefits? If you think back to Dr. Bredesen's early explanations about Alzheimer's disease, he typed Alzheimer's disease. He gave them characteristics or personalities, and he would say, some people have inflammatory dementias, meaning that there's inflammation going on throughout their body. Their brain is on fire, they're hot. And then he gave examples. Look at homocysteine and CRP and an AG ratio and A1C and interleukin-6. Do they drink alcohol? Blah, 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 right? Some people are glycotoxic. Some people are atrophic. Well, if you look at these summaries, I think methylene blue actually pairs very well with individuals who have this inflammatory type dementia, right? These contributors or these risk factors that would lead someone into some form of neurodegenerative disease because of inflammation, methylene blue would be a good fit. Okay, let's go to the next slide. He talks a lot about toxic dementia. These are typically younger clients that 40s or 50s. They don't have the ApoE4 genetics, and they've had all types of exposures in their lifetime. These are viral dementias or toxic dementias. How about blood flow dementias or toxic or traumatic injuries? People with CTE, they've hit their head so many times that they've had concussion after concussion after concussion, right? Well, what do we do for these folks? Each one of these instances, I think, would be a viable option for a recommendation for methylene blue. One reason is because in order to clear a toxin, you've got to have energy. You've got to have ATP that helps clear that from the body. So that's why I think it could be beneficial in a toxic disorder. Vascular dementias lack blood flow to the brain, and methylene blue is going to help vasodilate. It's going to have that interaction with healthy nitric oxide and improve blood flow to the brain and also stimulate ATP production. And traumatic brain injuries like concussions, they cause inflammation. So that takes us back into type 1 that we just talked about. So each one of those would also be a circumstance where methylene blue could be considered as an intervention to strengthen someone's outcome when they're participating in a cognitive enhancing protocol like the ENHANCE protocol. Okay? Now, Dr. Bredesen didn't talk about these, but these are things that I have also brought to the table based on my work and study in Dr. Karazian and Dr. Mark Gordon and learning about hyperbaric therapy and so forth. There are individuals who have a very infectious component. I think Dr. Bredesen lumps these in with inflammatory, but I've separated them because I feel like there's additional interventions. If you just say inflammation, you may be less likely to prescribe antiviral medications. And we've had enough experience at A Mind for All Seasons recognizing how many people actually benefit when you give them valcyclovir. It makes just a huge difference. So these would be people who are chronically complaining of long hauler syndrome, or they've had viral encephalitis as a young person. One of the clients that I did a telemedicine call with out of Florida is a young lady who was admitted into the hospital with Lyme disease at the age, I think she was like 6 years old. She was in a coma for a month, and they determined it was Lyme encephalitis. I think she actually would probably do very well with methylene blue. That's something I'd like to talk with her about, right? And another form is neuroautoimmunity. You never just pick this up randomly. You actually have to go looking for it and testing for it. It's a dead giveaway when someone has terrible irritable bowel or they already have autoimmunity in some form. And then microglia priming is another one. And microglia priming is kind of a clinical picture. We can't really test for this either, but this is when a senior with a little bit of neurodegenerative disease like a dementia then gets a UTI and they lose their mind. It's that inflammatory response because their astrocytes and glia cells become inflamed. Well, in each of these cases as well, methylene blue, particularly with infectious causes and people who are primed, methylene blue could also have a really nice benefit. Okay, so there's my presentation for today. My goal is to let you know that when it comes to nootropics, one of the challenges that I have faced is where do you draw the line and stop? See, we do all of the testing and we make recommendations based on our testing, and it's not uncommon that our clients are recommended to take somewhere between 8 and 12 supplements. Well, then if I get into the nootropic sections, do I add lion's mane or cordyceps mushrooms? Would they benefit from the carnitine and have a little bit of nicotine with methylene blue, right? The challenge that I run into is I have to draw the line somewhere and stop saying, I want you to take 50 supplements. It's actually really difficult to do, and I try to be thoughtful about it. I labor over it. I think through it and say, okay, where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? Because I know if an individual has a response, they do better. And honestly, they'll stick with this. If they say, oh my gosh, this made a huge difference for me, they stay engaged in the fight, they keep eating, they keep exercising. If they don't get better, it just becomes so painful for both the client and for us, because I think, God, what are we missing? So that's one of the challenges I face when I recommend methylene blue is, how do I plug it in? Well, I've tried to give you some of the clinical pictures of why I would recommend it. What are the certain circumstances where I think methylene blue could have some significant benefit?